James Prescott is the host of the Poema Podcast, and he's an author. Mike McHargue called him a talented conversationalist. James's story is a story of loss, grief, and transformation. James joins us to tell his story after this. I'm Bridge Livwad, and you're listening to The Wax Museum. Conversations that need to be had. Hello, James. Welcome to the Wax Museum.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So, James, I invited you on the Wax Museum to tell me your story. So, you live in England. Have you lived in England all your life?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I'm from near London. I was born in a little town called, it's quite a big town actually, called Epsom, which is in Surrey, and is about half an hour, 40 minutes train ride from London, central London. So, and now I live a bit closer in to London, but I've always lived in this area. So, around southwest London. But yeah, so that's where I kind of started life. And yeah, I've lived here my whole life.
Okay. So you were raised like in a religious family? Like, can you tell me a little bit about your religious upbringing?
Yeah. I mean, my family went to church. I don't think we weren't hardcore religious. My parents, they were regular church goers. They had faith. I was taken to Sunday school as was my sister. And we went every Sunday. I was baptized as a baby. It was a Methodist church, so a bit more liberal than most churches. I mean, we had women in leadership roles in ordained ministry and preaching, in the 1980s. So, which I didn't realize how progressive that was at the time. I just thought it was normal. So, I mean, so I kind of grew up with that, and that was kind of my religious upbringing, I guess. We weren't kind of legalistic about it at home at all. We barely talked about faith at home, actually. It was an interesting time. It was relatively normal up to when I was 8 years old. And it was Holy Week 1985 and Easter Monday, April the 1st, actually. I'll never forget the date as long as I live. But my mother had a very serious asthma attack right in front of me. I was 8 years old, very introverted, very shy, very sensitive. And I kind of saw this kind of happen in front of me. I came down the stairs to see the front door open and an ambulance arriving, and went into the lounge and saw my mother there, like frozen on the chair, not moving.
Oh my God.
Not breathing. The room was quite darkly lit, as I remember. But it was obviously for a little boy. That's quite scary.
Yeah.
And then it all happened really quickly. She was taken away on a stretcher by the ambulance, taken straight to hospital. My dad literally followed them out. I didn't get any explanation as to what was going on or where they were going or what was happening or what had happened to her. She was just gone. She was in a coma and on a ventilator for at least a week. They thought she wouldn't last the night. They didn't think she was going to survive. And my dad had to ring her brother to tell her that, like, come down, bring clothes for a funeral. It's not looking good, you know. So the expectation was that she would die, and remarkably, she didn't. She survived, and eventually came off the ventilator. The problem was that in between her having an asthma attack and being on a ventilator, she had suffered brain damage.
Oh.
To her short-term memory, and so was unable to. Her short-term memory basically didn't work properly anymore. My dad went to visit her once during this time, and he told me this. And he went to the toilet and went to speak to the doctor and things, and came back 15 minutes later, and she had no recollection of him being there.
Wow.
So that's how bad it was to start with. The first thing she actually said to my dad when she came out of her coma was she phoned him up and said, "I'm back." And my dad said, "Great. Well, where have you been?" Like he said, "Oh, I've been with Jesus at Galilee, and he sent me back."
Huh.
Right. So this happened.
Wow.
Obviously, I got told that. I was already at Sunday school at the time, and I'm pretty sure that piqued my curiosity in this kind of Jesus stuff a bit more.
Huh. So that kind of made it more real to you? Like at that point? Like it
Yeah, it did. It did, because the way she talked about it was a very tangible experience, a very real
wow.
experience. And she talked about it later on in her life, again, and was kind of very graphic in detail on what happened. So yeah, so that happened. Her short-term memory did improve, but she was unable to work again. And before that, she had been quite an independent woman, had a good career, was about to go back to teaching and become head of French and things like this. She was a French teacher. She didn't forget any of her fluent French, despite the brain damage. So her long-term memory was not damaged. So she remembered who we were, for example, her children.
Right.
Long-term memory damage would have been worse, actually.
Do you
so,
did you get a sense that she was like sad that she couldn't teach anymore?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And this goes into what happened later. She was. I didn't get the sense at the time. I was too young really to understand.
Very young, yeah.
But she definitely, there was a big loss there.
Right.
It was a tremendous loss to her. She found it hard to accept that she could no longer do that. But she was unable to do that. She tried to go back to teaching, but couldn't do it, and had to settle herself with being a tutor, a private tutor, which obviously didn't pay as well, and wasn't a full-time thing. So and it was devastating for her. Me, as the eldest and being sensitive, and I kind of took responsibility for everybody at that point. And I talked about this with my therapist, that I basically said, well, it's my job to look after the family now. I have to look after everybody else. I don't. My needs don't matter anymore. I have to look after everybody else and protect.
At what age?
8 years old. This was like, it wasn't a conscious thing at all. I was totally unaware of it.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. It was really difficult. And so that was kind of what I started doing. And my mother became depressed, and this eventually led her to becoming alcoholic. She, to numb the pain, she probably forgot she'd had a drink and then had another drink as
Really?
well. And I suspect it started like that.
Yeah, I could see that.
She would generally forget she'd had a drink and have another one, and then it just escalated out of control. And as I became a teenager, our home became quite violent, because she would get quite aggressive when she was drunk. My dad was struggling with the emotional burden, and having to carry the family by himself, having to provide for the family by himself, not getting the emotional support from my mother that he'd had. It was a big strain on him too, and it was a lot of stress for him to deal with. So he had a lot of stress, that he wasn't dealing with, and they didn't have the mental health stuff support that you have now. They didn't have child support that they have now. They didn't have, social care, child protection stuff that they have now. If that had been in place then what followed in the next few years may have been avoided. But it wasn't in place. So as I came into my teenage years, my parents would fight almost every day after I got home from school, and sometimes I would have to break up those fights. My sister was kind of protected from this, being younger. She kind of hid away in her room. That was her way of dealing with it. Whereas I kind of felt it was my job to, parent my parents. Effectively.
Yeah.
That's what I was doing, and yeah, it was, and of course, and for my part, I was getting bullied at school. I was getting psychologically and emotionally bullied at school every day. I was, like, again, shy, introverted. In hindsight, I had ASD, ADHD as well. So socializing was difficult for me anyway. I got easily manipulated and bullied, and I had no one to talk to about it, and nothing ever got done. And then I would go home, and then I'd have more stuff going on at home. So it was really horrible. I have no wish to relive it.
No.
And I, to be honest, my mind has blanked a lot of memories from that time.
I'm sure.
I don't know every specific story. I know some stories, but not. I don't know everything. It was 5-6 years. It was just horrible.
So the way you process it now, right? Like being able to look at it and say, okay, my mother was an alcoholic, as a result of, losing a lot. She was depressed and she became an alcoholic, and then seeing your father had a lot of strain on him and they would fight a lot. You're able to look at that like with an adult brain and say, this is why. But as a teenager or as a child, did you see it the same way, or were you just like perplexed as to why all this was happening?
Well, I kind of understood Mum's situation with her memory and not being able to work and that struggle. And we adapted quite quickly to helping her and supporting her with her memory.
Right.
So I understood that, but and I understood that, that Dad was doing a lot of his stuff himself, but I wasn't quite aware of the depth of the trauma that they were going through, especially my dad.
Right.
Because my dad didn't show it much, and he was often out. Obviously, he was at work during the day, out sometimes in the evening. So I didn't see it as much from him. I didn't understand it as much from him because Mum's needs were so obvious that it was more obvious that she was struggling than he was. So yeah, and I just thought it was my job to kind of make sure everyone was okay. And I didn't. I mean, at the time, I kind of wasn't quite aware. I wasn't quite aware of the alcoholism until probably I was about 15, 14 or 15, because I was quite naive, to be honest.
Right.
She used to send me to buy bottles of whiskey, and buy myself a drink or something, like a Coke or something like that. Earlier on.
Yeah.
Later on, I realised that's what was going on, so I didn't do it. But it was too late by then.
Yeah.
And to be honest, she was going to go and buy one anyway, whether I
That's
bought
right.
it for her or not. So it
Mhm.
didn't really matter who bought it. She was going
Right.
to, I could, like I say, I'm not going to do this, and I did later on. But she would get it anyway. And
Right. So
and so yeah, I mean, my teenage years were kind of hell, and
right.
I did go to church then. I did make a confession of faith as a teenager. That was kind of almost my escape, really, because I used to go every night. I used to go up to my room at bedtime and just tell God how I was feeling. That was how I got into praying, really. Because I had no one else to tell how I was doing, so I would just tell him, and in my bed every night. And
Did that help?
I don't know how much it helped, but it certainly made me feel less alone. And
Yeah.
the church was a safe place at that point.
So
Even though I didn't really fit in socially there either, I didn't get
right.
bullied there. It was
So
just a safe. It was kind of a safe place.
So you didn't feel like you fit in socially at church either?
No, not really. I mean, I was a bit of. I had friends there, but
Yeah.
I wasn't kind of in the clique,
Right.
Um,
Did you find too that, like, other than, like, was it only at your family where you needed to keep everybody okay, or did that apply to other areas of your life?
At first, it was just my family.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, but I guess kind of being a white man as well, like there's this kind of whole concept of wanting to fix people, save people.
Right.
I grew up with loving Superman.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Superman the movie, Superman 78, when I was about 4, 5,
Mm-hmm.
and it just blew me away. Like Christopher Reeve Superman was who I wanted to be. He believed the best in everybody. He saw
Yeah.
the best in everybody. He um, he put others before himself.
Yeah.
He yeah he saved people. He did the right. He always did the right thing, right?
Right.
And he was a friend. He was almost like my friend, and he was
Yeah.
just a friend to everybody, and was kind to everybody. And that's who I wanted to be. That's the kind of person I wanted to be. That
Did
might have
you?
been, that might have led me to Jesus, actually, because when I found Jesus, I was like, well, this is like a real life version of Superman kind of thing. Yeah.
That's interesting to me because, like, for me, what I've walked through is kind of seeing my public persona as Superman and then my home persona as, like, Clark Kent. And I need to make sure I do enough Clark Kent so I have the bandwidth to be Superman. Did you ever think about Clark Kent, or did you only think about Superman?
I only thought about Superman at that point.
Okay.
Because I mean, I think I wanted to save. I wanted to save my my family.
Right.
I wanted to save my
Of course.
parents.
Yeah.
I wanted to save their marriage.
Yeah.
I wanted to save my mum from being ill. Yeah, I failed. My parents got divorced. The day I finished my last exams at school, my dad sat me down and told me he was leaving, and I was relieved. I was like,
Huh.
finally, you know, like you
Yeah.
could have done this 2 years ago, it would have made my life a lot easier, kind of thing. I didn't say that at the time, but that's what I felt. I felt relief.
That's so you felt relief, but at the same time you felt a sense of failure.
I think, underneath I did. Yeah, there was a part of
Yeah.
me that felt the failure, because it was like, well, it was my job to fix this. I'm meant
Yeah.
to put this out, and I couldn't. The 8-year-old in me felt he failed.
And that's
Yeah.
incredible, like the level of expectations we can place on ourselves. It's like an 8-year-old is not going to save a marriage. And so like to be able to walk through that and like understand and give yourself grace, not that you even require grace for that. It's ridiculous for an
Yeah.
8-year-old to think they have to do
Yeah.
all that.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. I was 18 when my dad left.
Right.
10 years between the two in that period, the way it all happened. Yeah, and I mean, he did. It's not like he was an absent father after that. He wasn't at all.
Right.
He just left the family home.
Right.
And he kept paying the mortgage as well.
Uh-huh.
And he paid for our food and stuff. My mother wasn't working, so couldn't afford to pay the mortgage. I couldn't afford to pay like for food for both of us and everything. And he kept paying for that, and he kept supporting us. And he was still physically around. We still got to see him. So it wasn't like he was an absent father, or he didn't love us or didn't do. I think he left because he cared. He told me later that he left because he still loved my mother and he didn't want to hurt her, because she was winding up so much that he had a lot of anger, and he was scared. And he was scared that one day that something would happen, that she would provide. And there's no innocent party in this. My mother is not innocent, and my dad is not innocent.
That's really complex. Hey, and I guess you were 18, so maybe easier for you to understand, probably harder for your sister to understand.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the effect on my sister was different, and I won't speak for her, but
no, that's fair.
But I know it was different.
Yeah.
In my experience. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, and both sides were at fault in their own way, and and at the time, on the surface, it looked like it was all my dad's fault. That's what a lot of outside people thought.
Right.
Because my dad, 6'4", 6'3", tall. My mother, 5'2", quite short and skinny. Whatever. What does it look like on the outside? Not many people knew about the alcohol. Not many people knew what was really going on. And that wouldn't be the case nowadays, by the way. but then, yeah, it was like we were a middle class family, and in suburbia, different time, but
that's interesting too, like, because I remember, my childhood growing up, and it's like you go to church and there's like that church community is kind of everything, like their opinions matter. The way you sit in church, the way you behave in church, it's like everybody knows. And I guess maybe that's true about a small community too, because I don't feel like life is that way anymore, for me anyways, where it really matters that I'm in a community where everybody's making judgments on how I behave as a father, as a husband, as a human being. It's like I feel disconnected from that.
At school wouldn't have happened. It would have been stopped. And if I was struggling emotionally, or my sister had been struggling, they would have asked what was going on at home, and things would have maybe got done. So they're much more aware of the signs of things not going well at home now than they were then. They didn't really notice or pay attention or weren't aware of that then. So I think now if it had happened now, we would have got more support for sure. My mother would have got more support trying to deal with her addiction. She did get, and we would have got probably family therapy. My parents would have got couples therapy, or it would have been different. We would have probably got therapy as well, children's versions of therapy. So it would have been very, very different. But that's just, you can't choose when you're born.
No, you can't. But I think what's interesting about that is that like stuff like this will be prevented in the future. I'm sure not all of it, but more of it will be prevented in the future. And that makes me a little bit more hopeful about it.
Yeah, exactly. Same.
But it doesn't change, the trauma that you experience and what you're walking through right now.
No, absolutely. Because that period really defines the rest of my life in a lot of ways. And as it would, it's a lot of trauma. I'm still processing a lot of trauma from that period. So
yeah.
So I mean, after that, I went to university, and that's where I kind of encountered kind of evangelical Christianity more. Well, some of it had been brought over here. We just had the Toronto blessing, and that was kind of coming over here. And I was a student, of course, so young, lots of energy, and in the church, and I kind of got caught up in that a bit, and hands in the air, people falling over in the spirit, all of that. I didn't really get into theology that much. It wasn't. I was just kind of like accepted what a Christian was meant to believe and didn't really question it.
Right.
I hadn't really thought about my own opinions, but I think I have a feeling that intuitively I was already like, well, women are equal to men and should be doing the same things as men, and already kind of probably LGBTQ affirming, but I didn't realize it at the time.
Wow. So you never really had a stage where you weren't.
I never had that emotion of thinking that your sexuality is a sin. I never actually believed that. I just kind of accepted it. It was like, oh, I have to believe this because I'm a Christian.
Right.
So I don't have a choice. I don't get to question it. I don't get to, but I think as I discovered down the line when I did start to question it, it was like, oh yeah, well, this doesn't feel right. It never felt right. I never liked this. I didn't know anyone who was gay at that point, right? So it wasn't a lived experience thing for me either. So, and I was in a Christian Union, which was kind of, very kind of, it felt like an evangelical kind of atmosphere where it was, one man, one woman for life, no sex outside of marriage, all of that. That's how it was, the kind of get together at university, whatever, get married thing, without the kind of evangelical culture around it, because Britain's quite a secular culture, and was even then. But within Christian circles, there was this kind of bubble, and the kind of Toronto blessing and stuff, and all the kind of movement of the spirit and things. Yeah, it was that was kind of where I was. And actually, I found a prayer triplet at university which benefited me a lot. And we used to meet and have a meal together and pray together and then go to church together and every Sunday. And that actually meant a lot to me at the time.
Well, that's, that mysticism, right? Because it's like you talk about your mother's experience, and that kind of really stimulated something in you. And then Toronto Blessing, it's like you're almost just like, you know what? I can turn my brain off and just experience the supernatural and believe in the supernatural and grasp at that hope.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I had. And it was certainty, it was religious certainty. I guess having been through what I had been through, it's kind of what I needed, I guess, to something to hold on to that wasn't falling apart at the seams. I never actually told many people about what had happened before.
Right.
And my university was actually quite far away from where I was brought up. It was 3.5 hours drive, which in England is quite a long way. I know it's not that far away in America or Canada, but it is in England. So yeah, so I was away from home. I didn't really, engage with it much. I rang my mum every week. I spoke to my dad every week on the phone. That was it, really. I didn't really know what was going on at home, uh, or I knew bits and pieces, but that was it. I didn't really care, to be honest.
Mhm.
At that point, I kind of just like I needed a break from it all.
Oh, for
Uh,
sure. Like the whole like leaving home and there's trauma at home and it's like I'm gonna live my own life now and
yeah,
this is
yeah,
not gonna be my problem. I know that feeling.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
came back after university when I got a degree in politics, and eventually started working. And at this point, my parents were divorced, and my dad was was in a relationship with the person who would eventually be his second wife. Um,
Hmm.
and my mother was living on her own. Um, she had got into recovery by this point. She was doing a lot better. Her and my dad were now talking again as friends. Things were a lot better, uh, and I got my own kind of studio place,
Hmm.
and things were okay. And I found a new church, a different church to the one I'd grown up in, but with a lot of people my own age or just a bit younger, who I could a new set of friends. I was starting over in a sense, and so this was all good. And then when I was 23, my mother had another serious asthma attack and died.
Oh.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, April the 29th, 2000. She died, and I got a
Wow.
phone. It was a Saturday morning. I was lying in bed asleep. My phone rang. My really like old mobile phone, my brick. It was one of the first mobile phones, um, and my dad just told me that my mother had passed away, and so I went into shock, and
Yeah.
I didn't really feel anything for a couple of weeks. It was again, it's my job to look after everybody, right?
So that
I have to
kind of
look,
came back in that moment.
yeah, I have to look after it's my job to make sure everyone else is okay.
Right.
And I was actually quite relaxed because I think that the trauma, my childhood trauma, had put me on this kind of expect the worst to happen. Be
Right.
always be on edge, always be tense, always because the worst is otherwise the worst will happen if you relax. So and now the worst had happened, and so I was quite relaxed because it's like, well, this doesn't get any worse. So yeah, I went to my mum's house on the day that she died, and to just because obviously we had to sort out her stuff, and my dad cried. He broke down, and I had to give him a hug. You know, um,
Had you seen your dad cry before? Like, was that new
I
to
wasn't
you?
crying. Um, that was the first time. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
the first time I seen him cry. Yeah,
And that's a huge thing in itself.
it was because I had this image of him as almost kind of I was almost scared of him. Um,
Hmm.
I'd never seen him get emotional like that. But actually, I've discovered since he's quite an emotional person and he cries a lot, and he just kept it in because kind of these ideas of masculinity that he'd been brought up in, and
Yeah,
he wasn't meant.
it's a toxic thing.
Yeah, and he of course he grew up in the 50s and 60s and stuff with all the kind of old ideas of masculinity and stuff, and so it wasn't his fault really that he wasn't expressing those emotions,
No.
but in front of me he just broke down because I mean he and my mum married for 25 years,
Right.
and a lot of those were happy.
Yeah.
So and even after, once they broke up and she was in recovery, they were friends again. So it was, you know, was a big loss to him.
Yeah.
And I know that he still misses her, and he still occasionally talks about her. And I don't think he ever really stopped loving her, to be honest.
Yeah.
Which is nice, actually. I
Yeah.
kind of like. Yeah. So yeah, I didn't cry for 2 weeks. We were preparing the funeral, and we put some music on. It was "Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes" by Paul Simon, which is kind of a song that sums up my mum. And she loved Paul Simon's music and stuff as well, so she loved that album. It was like a family album almost. So, and I was off guard. It caught me off guard, and I just broke down. And I apologized. I apologized to my sister for crying. And she said, "Don't apologize. This is what you need to do. It's okay to cry. This is a good thing, you know." And she just gave me a hug, and yeah, I cried, and I cried at the funeral. But after that, I bottled up a lot of anger, and eventually it manifested, and I had to get counselling.
Do you know who that anger was targeted toward, or?
I think a few people. I think I was angry. I was angry with my mum for abandoning us, which is a normal response to losing somebody, by the way.
Yeah.
When I know it sounds irrational.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, it's you're not rational when you're grieving sometimes. Why did you leave me?
Yeah.
Of course, later on after therapy and and later, but yeah, when you're in the midst of grief, your body doesn't understand that. So yeah, I think it was also anger at myself. I learned in therapy last year that actually I blamed myself for her death, because I couldn't save her.
That's hard.
It was my job to protect her.
So that's Superman expectation you placed on yourself, hey?
It was, yeah. I did that for a long time, like a long time, and I started to. What I realised is now, I couldn't stop my mother's death. That was what was going on underneath. I didn't know that at the time, but that's what it was. And I think there's still an element of me that doesn't love myself, and I don't know whether it's to do with that or not. But I know that it wasn't my fault. I know it wasn't my responsibility. There's nothing I could have done. I could have been standing next to her when she had an asthma attack, and I couldn't have stopped her from dying. So there's nothing. You could have had a ventilator right next to her, and it wouldn't have saved her. There was no one. Nothing could have been done. So fortunately, I had a really good church community then. I had good friends. I had my faith was kind of growing, but that event was probably what set off the last 21 years of my spiritual journey, the deconstruction. Because at that point, the God that I had followed up until that point was no longer big enough for me.
Yeah.
He wasn't enough to deal with what had happened to me. He wasn't enough to stop what had happened to me from happening.
Right.
And I had all these questions in my head. And I didn't even know I did until somebody at my church, kind of, who liked to ask questions, kept challenging me with questions. And in my head, I was going, I have the same questions. That's interesting. And I couldn't tell anyone this because I was like, well, I can't question my faith, can I? I can't ask questions. I just have to believe, right?
That's crazy, because I
know,
remember thinking about like how Jesus said you need to have the faith of a child, and as a kid and as a young adult I always thought, oh, kids will believe anything, so I got to believe anything. And it took me until probably my 30s to realize the faith of a child asks way too many questions all the time. That's what kids do. They ask so many questions, and I'm like, I had the faith of a child all wrong.
Yes, because children ask more questions than any other age group, I think.
They absolutely
So
do. They're inherently curious. So why are we afraid to let people be inherently curious? That's a
yeah,
poor thing that the church has done.
exactly. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it took. I remember going to an event in 2000. It took 5 years for me to start actually verbalizing these questions. And what happened was I went to a conference, an event, kind of a evangelical event, lots of worship and live worship and preaching and Holy Spirit stuff. And there was this marketplace there, and they were selling these things that I'd never seen before. They were selling DVDs, these little 10-minute DVDs, and they looked really cool. And all the kind of branding looked really good and stuff. And I was curious about them, and so I bought a couple of them. And I also saw this book by the same person that had made these videos called Velvet Elvis. And so I bought Velvet Elvis, like innocently, not knowing what was going to be in there. And I sat in my tent and I opened it up, and I'd never read a book in one sitting before. I read this book in one sitting. I literally couldn't put it down. I could not stop reading it. It was like water in a desert. It was like, oh, I can ask all these questions. This is okay. I'm allowed to ask questions. I'm allowed to look at things differently. I'm allowed to have curiosity about my faith. This is all okay and allowed. And this is better than what I've had before. This is liberating. And yeah, that was it. I was on my way then. That changed my life. So from then on, I was all in asking questions. I was finding anybody who was doing that. I started reading Pete Rollins, who just was just emerging on the scene. I started reading other people like that. I found a new church community which was open to questions, open to doubts, open to conversation, and I was allowed to explore my beliefs and question them. I discovered old liturgies and contemplation and all that kind of stuff, and which really benefited me, which I'd never experienced before. And silent prayer and all of that. I started to discover all of that, which was really, really great. And yeah, I was really moving forward, and I was starting to think about theology and what I believed, and and all that kind of thing, and why I believed it, and suddenly it was like, yeah, this is when I started to kind of come to my realizations on roles of women and being fully LGBTQ affirming and all of that. I started to shift to these places and feel comfortable there and be okay with that. And I was growing, and it was really good. And I didn't stop. I didn't rest anywhere. I did kind of find a form of progressive certainty in the church that I was in. To a certain extent, it was kind of progressive Christianity, but it was a form of certainty. Now I see, which allowed for doubts and questions, but only up to a point, kind of thing, which is kind of ironic. But I was still growing. I wasn't. I was determined that I was not going to stop growing, and I was not going to stop learning. I was not going to stop educating myself, and I was not going to stop moving forward. And so I kept on doing that, and that's really when I started writing. I started blogging regularly about faith. Quite like really often. It was just something I did for fun, for love, because I loved writing, and it was kind of my way to express my faith, writing. And I think some of those blogs are probably still up somewhere.
Yeah, I'm gonna find them.
Yeah, one of them's called Evolving Church, I think. revolvingchurch.wordpress.com, something like that. I can't remember. Which is scary thing about that is it's now probably about 15, 16 years old. So anyway, yeah, I was moving forward, and but then it kind of this thing happened in my church, which is really sad. That the pastor lost both their parents within 6 months, and it was really, really sad. And I felt so sorry for him, and absolute tragic. But what worried me was that I knew by now that there were different ways to respond to grief. I'd done enough grief work by then already to understand that you could either move back into certainty, or you could go and ask more questions, and and take and jump and risk, which is what I'd done. And unfortunately, it was the former that happened. It was, the church changed overnight. Suddenly it was no questions allowed. You don't question the pastor. Everything's controlled from the center. Theologically wasn't quite as progressive. It was still quite progressive, but yeah, I could feel the energy shift. I could feel it. It was palpable, and I began to feel increasingly uncomfortable. There were people in my church who were not LGBTQ affirming, which I didn't like. But the church as a whole welcomed LGBTQ people, and we had people in the church who were LGBTQ and felt safe and comfortable there. So I was okay with that as long as they felt safe there. Yeah, and yeah, it was difficult. It all came to, I found a really good home group, kind of outside the box kind of thinking people, and it was a really lovely group for 3 or 4 years. It was more church than going to church. I enjoyed that more than going on Sundays. It felt like what real church should be, or having proper discussions every week, and
those kinds of small groups
are,
that's important. That's important stuff. And I think that's kind of the case everywhere, that it's like those small groups are much more life-giving than the big Sunday celebration.
Yeah, especially for an introvert, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of came to a breaking point. When an LGBT couple weren't allowed to lead a home group based purely on sexuality, no other reason. They've been doing a really good job, and people were going there and growing in faith and everything. And there was no reason for it to end, but some people in the church weren't happy with it, and yeah, that was the beginning of the end for me. But I had this moment, and I will go back to the writing because that'll help understand it. My writing had taken off. I now had a proper blog. I had a self-hosted blog. I had written a few ebooks which had done really well. I'd given away for free. I'd written the draft of what would become my book later on, and that was going really well. But my writing mentor betrayed me, and stole ideas that I had and used them to make profit.
It's awful.
And that started to kill my love of writing. Writing was my thing. I just couldn't help but write. It was just in me. It was who I was. It was the thing I was really, really good at. And and suddenly it was like somebody had stabbed me in the heart and ripped it out from behind me. And it was it was absolutely heartbreaking. It was a grief. It was a trauma. It was a, you know, it was horrible. And combined with the kind of frustration I was feeling at church, I had a lot of pent up stuff in me.
Yeah.
And so, there was this moment at home group, and where I'll never forget it. I think it was 2015, November 2015, and suddenly I don't know what we were talking about, but suddenly all this stuff just started to come out of me. I started to say all this stuff that was frustrating me, and I'm pinned to this chair I was sitting on. Suddenly my body was just almost like, and I could feel all this energy coming out of my body. It was like an exorcism. It was like
Huh.
a whole load of trauma and pain coming out of my body. And the energy of it was holding me back on the chair that I was sitting on. And it was incredible. I'll never forget it. And when I was done, my body was more relaxed than it had been for a long time.
Huh.
And everyone had told me afterwards, like, "Oh yeah, we've seen this for weeks, and we were praying that there'd be some release that would come."
Huh.
Wow! Oh really?
Huh.
So yeah, and at that point, I thought, okay, that's it. I don't need to do any more on this. This is it, because that's what certainty is like, right? But I knew in my head that intuitively, I knew that there was stuff that I hadn't dealt with that I was carrying. I just knew it, and I didn't know what it was or where it was, but I knew it, and so I kind of thought, oh, maybe this will be it. Maybe this will be what deals with that, and it wasn't. And got prayed for in my home group, and I got this picture of myself at the top of a mountain, or top of a valley, with somebody next to me, a man next to me. I presumed it was Jesus next to me, but I was looking down over this valley, and it was it was dark. There was lots of cloud. I couldn't see through the cloud. I couldn't see to the other side, really. I couldn't see what was down there. But I knew I had to go there. And I was just getting a nudge from the divine to go there. And I knew I had to go there, and that was it. You know, I knew that it could get worse before it got better. I knew that there might be a cost, but I knew that I had to do it if I wanted to keep growing. It was the only thing I could do, and so I did. And I hired a spiritual director, who I'm still with now, and I got a coach as well, and I started to do the work. And this was kind of stage 2 of deconstruction. I was not just deconstructing my faith this time, though. I was deconstructing myself, my whole life. It was everything. And I was probably deconstructing out of progressive Christianity as well. And so that took a long time. And
so you deconstructed out of, a more kind of evangelical Christianity, became a progressive Christian, and then you're deconstructing out of progressive Christianity. And is it to just a faith that you don't label? Like, is that where you're at? Or
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of in betweens there, but I mean, I had a book that came out in 2017 about grace, Christian. I'd written it in 2012, so it was almost out of date by the time it got released in terms of my own story. But yeah, my spirituality's evolved, because since then I've done a lot of I've done proper therapy, internal family systems therapy, as well, which is basically when you go into your body and your brain and you kind of personalize trauma wounds, and you talk to them and you do work with them and you build relationships with them and do healing work with them. And it's really effective, and you actually discover things about yourself that you didn't know. That's how I discovered a lot of this stuff about blaming myself for my mother's death,
Right.
because it was just in there and I didn't even realize. So it's like communicating with your body.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of that. I did a lot of embodiment work.
And I want to learn so much about embodiment. That's just a fascinating thing, because like the idea that your body knows things that your brain doesn't, and it's like,
yeah, that's right. I mean, I work with Jamie Lee Finch, and she's amazing.
yeah, she has a
and
book coming out on that. I don't think that's come out yet, has it?
I think she's already written a book about it. I think it's already out.
Oh, maybe it is out.
You are
Okay.
not, your body is your own, or something like that.
Okay.
You are your own. Yeah, that's what it is. I've got a copy of it.
Yeah, I'll have to read that.
But yeah, it's kind of basically your body is a person, and you talk to them, and they have a gender assignment as well, like he, she, or they, and so you talk to them, and you build a relationship with them, and you learn to listen to them, and you start to take care of them and have conversations with them. And the IFS therapy helped with that as well. It was kind of both. I was doing both at the same time, so it was kind of really, really good for me learning to communicate with my body and listen to my body and hear what he was saying and hear what was going on. So that was all really, really positive. I did a lot of healing that way, and and I started reading about quantum physics and about how time works, and thinking about theories of human consciousness and spiral dynamics, and obviously the Enneagram, and all of these things started to mix up in my head, and I started to make connections, and even learning about astrology a little bit as well, and encountering tarot, and like just learning about different things and making connections. And it was, I started to see how these things were all connected. And yeah, I'm realizing I was a highly sensitive person, which is like a condition which 20% of people have.
Would they say that's more of a personality type than a condition?
Sorry?
Like, would they say that's more of a personality type than a condition? Highly sensitive person. I read a book on it.
It's not a personality type. It's definitely a condition. I mean,
it is a condition. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It basically means you don't have the same filters that other people do for kind of energy and emotion and
right.
And you internalize a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like I went on Twitter the day before, the day Chadwick Boseman died, right? The news didn't break till the next day, but the day it happened, I felt all this grief, all this anger, all this emotion, all this heavy weight in my body, and I didn't know why.
Mm-hmm.
There was no anniversary. It wasn't a grief anniversary. It wasn't a birthday. It was nothing. I didn't know what it was, and then I woke up the next day and saw the news, and it was like, oh, right. And I mean, just scrolling through Twitter that day, I felt a huge weight.
Yeah.
Grief. I could feel it tangibly. It was, and that's highly sensitive people can do that. And it's and it's a gift, and it's a gift, and sometimes it's not a gift,
Totally.
Things, but I wouldn't change that about myself. But
no.
Yeah, discovering that about myself was helpful.
It is.
And then I learned about this thing called quantum entanglement, where it's a thing. I'm not a scientist, but where atoms can bond with each other and can still have connection with each other after they're not in physically in the same place anymore, right? And I began to think this was happening with my mother and her consciousness, because I remember going to the new spiritual community that I'm now part of, and we were doing a Taizé service, which is like lots of chanting in French, without backing band, just chanting in French, and it's very powerful and it's very moving. And my mother was a French teacher and spoke fluent French, and I was singing these songs and getting the words wrong, and suddenly it was like I was in a different space. It was like I was no longer within time, or like it was like I was almost separate from everything. And me and my mother was there, and we were laughing and joking about how I was getting the words, the French words wrong. It was like this energy was all around. I was in this bubble of energy. Like it was just separate from everything, and it was tangible. It was really tangible. And I went home, and I was still in this bubble. I was talking to people engaging with people, around me, but I was still in energy-wise in this bubble. And I got home and I started journaling for the day, and then that's when I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, that was a thing. That was, I've never experienced that before.
Was that like, would you say then that moment of like laughter with your mom and your mom teasing you a little bit was like a like tremendously healing moment?
It was it was a transcendent spiritual experience.
I'd imagine it would be. That
was,
sounds amazing.
yeah, and it's not the last time it's happened. I mean, I had a couple of other experiences like that, and this is when I started to learn about quantum entanglement, and like I'm thinking that, hold on, sometimes a song will just come on that reminds me of her just when I need it, and sometimes and I'll just get a little senses that she's there, or and I remember there's this film that came out in the summer called Reminiscence, which is about basically a guy invents a machine where you can go back into your own memories and physically interact with them. And there's this scene where the love of his life is communicating with him through a memory, creating a memory so that he can communicate with her. And he walked into this memory and interacts with her, and it was her saying goodbye to him. And it was surreal. I found myself suddenly crying. I hadn't been crying at all in this movie at all. And suddenly I was crying. Suddenly I was like in another place. Suddenly it was my mother talking to me in the room where we met the last time I saw her. And saying things to me now, as I am now. And it lasted about 30 seconds. And when I was done, I was an emotional wreck. I got empty emotionally, having been completely fine 30 seconds before. And I was crying and everything. And I was like, whoa, what just happened? That was incredible. And I keep having these kind of experiences, and so I mean, it's my spirituality is in a very interesting place now, because I'm having a few of these experiences, and not just with my mother as well. Learning about time as a construct, that lives in me rather than something that I live in, and beginning to understand my body as a person that's living in me. My consciousness and awareness almost being things that those are living in. I've started to do meditations, which kind of begin with that root thought, and I just again found myself having kind of transcendent experiences. like, and you could call it out of body experiences, I guess, but and it's just elation, um, just realizing that everything is connected, that having a sense of tangible spirituality and external consciousness, and the energy of the animating energy of the universe is what I like to call it, and still having a sense of, I love Jesus and I love his message and I love his example, and understanding, oh, maybe there's more to Jesus than I actually was taught as a Christian, like Christian churches. Maybe there's elements of other things in there, and maybe there's deeper truth that he was hinting at that I hadn't understood, and I can now understand, and that is amazing.
I truly believe that if it's taking you towards love, it is taking you toward the divine.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so it's like, there's a lot of things that people are like, oh, careful now. And I'm like, well, if it's leading you away from love, then yes, careful now. But it's like, I think that we make things so complicated with all of our rules and our certainties, when in reality, I just believe the divine's trying to draw us back to love. And so when I encounter people who are on a different journey than me, and I can see they're still moving towards love, I'm like, I'm not worried about that person. Even, my atheist friends, and I look at them and I'm like, I know you have no hope of believing in God right now. Like, there's nothing in you that can believe in God. And you know what? I believe the divine understands that, and that the divine will meet you where you are at as you pursue love. And I just think that's true for everyone.
Yeah. And that's definitely my experience. It's all I'm finding my journey is leading me towards love and connection.
Yeah.
And transcendence and joy and healing. Because all this journey is healing.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have been able. I'm now firmly believe that the reason I've been able to find this connection with my mother is because I did all this grief work, because I actually chose to feel the pain. I chose to feel, experience my grief and engage with it and befriend, work with it, rather than numb it with certainty, numb it with kind of toxic religion or religious certainty, numb it with any kind of things that we use. We can find to numb things. We find that we can use coffee addiction to numb the pain. And we can use so many things to numb dealing with our stuff.
Absolutely.
And I'm proud. I guess I'm proud of myself that I chose not to do that. I chose to actually do the work.
That's bravery, right? That's bravery.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I remember a pastor, I was just telling someone about this recently, but I have this pastor who I still think is the best pastor I've ever had. Shout out to Pastor Doug Frederick. And he did this sermon about being more than conquerors. And he said that, like, we can believe in the supernatural and believe that God's going to take me on one end of the fire, pick me up and put me on the other side of the fire. And that would make me a conqueror. But to be more than a conqueror is to actually walk right through the fire and come out of the other end changed. And I'm like, I think that's what you did. And that's what you're doing, is you're walking through the fire and coming out changed. And there's a lot of growth that happens through that, as opposed to pick me up and put me on the other end of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other important thing to note as a white person is that this journey has involved anti-racist work as well. And that I've had to get uncomfortable, and I've had to understand my own privilege and take my blinders off and be teachable and actually acknowledge when I've made mistakes and apologize and apologize well and unlearn inbuilt biases because that and unlearn kind of systemic racism and do anti-racist work and actually kind of almost unlearn the system that we all live in. That's part of the transformation journey. Me, otherwise we're just kind of moving from one form of privilege to another.
Yeah.
And so whatever you want to call it, deconstruction is kind of one element of the journey. The kind of the transformation journey out of toxic religion and having your identity defined by that system and that religion, like toxic religion, doesn't just include unlearning your beliefs or unlearning the identity that they gave you. It's unlearning all these toxic things like systemic racism and educating yourself and doing the work. And it's a lifelong journey. And I wanted to say that because I think it's a really important part of the journey. I didn't want to ignore that. I wanted to acknowledge it because I've had to do. I'm doing that work. I've done a lot of that work. I've made mistakes on the way, and I'm still doing that work. And that's been as much a part of my journey as anything.
You're still walking through the fire, as we all should be. Like we all should be doing the hard work. As I like to say, see it as I'm being formed more so into the image of love. And I'm going to fall short sometimes and I need grace. And that's kind of, I guess that's the ongoing Christianity that I still hold to, is that I do need grace because I'm never going to be 100% love. And I'm going to make a lot of missteps, but that doesn't excuse those missteps, and it's like, and I need to do better and I'm going to continuously do better. And, you can look at your history and see how you've grown and how you've progressed. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But in the moment, when you fail, you got to find grace and you got to ask for grace.
That's right. And have grace with yourself.
Yeah.
Yourself is really, really important. And being free of shame.
And,
it's, and that means you're able to make mistakes and pick yourself up again and keep learning.
Absolutely.
And know that your mistakes don't define your value, that you already have infinite value and worth just as you are. And that you can make mistakes and be okay and just keep learning, and do the work. It's not easy, but it is so much more liberating, and it is, and you find yourself, your true self, and the person you've always been. I didn't realize how much the system that I grew up in, both religious and even cultural, kind of tries to tell you what your identity is and drills it into you. And part of the journey is unlearning all of that and actually finding out who you really are underneath, and you always have been. That's where embodiment work really comes in handy. Because you start to listen to your body. And that's really, really good.
Well, and I think that's the thing too, like even just like maleness, if that's the right term, but it's like because, like I had a psychologist recommend this book on being a highly sensitive person, and you read into it and you're like, well, I would be that way, but I was taught not to be like that. And you realize how much, masculinity, kind of the masculinity that was enforced into you, held you back from being your true sensitive self. And it's like, so it's kind of like those people who, discover they're autistic late in life. They're like, oh, but I don't do any of that stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, I was conditioned to not act like I'm autistic, right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
and so
absolutely.
that's, I guess, another form of unlearning, right? Is to be able to be aware that, there's something happening right now and there's a heaviness and I can't explain this heaviness. And then you realize, oh, it's because Chadwick Boseman passed away. Right? And it's like,
Yeah,
that's
right.
incredible. And I
Like
think,
yesterday Facebook went down,
yeah.
and my body felt a lightness I had not felt
Yeah. Yeah.
ages. And I don't even use Facebook really. Like
Yeah.
I haven't posted anything personal there for years, but I could feel this lightness. It was like all the grief and anger and bitterness and cynicism and pain and hurt that's being caused on there is gone. It's just gone, you know,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
temporarily anyway. It had gone temporarily, and my body could feel that. It was like, so I was kind of just like feeling so much lighter and like joking around a bit and stuff. I was like, whoa, yeah. And it was definitely like linked to that because when it came back on again, I started to feel the weight come back on again.
Mm.
So it was, yeah, and
Well,
it's
and I,
incredible.
I and I think the huge thing with that is knowing what's yours to carry. As an empath, as a sensitive person, it's
Mm,
like I need to figure out what I'm not supposed to carry. And that's what I'm learning right now because I'm like, it's done wonders for my mental health to like not read news articles and not read the comments on news articles has done huge things for me because I'm like, my rage is gone. My hopelessness is gone. It's just like I don't need to know all these details about everything, and I'm
mm,
able to be there, for my loved ones, the real people that are in my life. I can have more bandwidth for them. And I think that's a big thing because
yeah,
it's so easy to carry everything for everyone. And I have the same kind of savior complex where I'm just like, I got to make everything okay for everyone.
yeah. And I mean, it's funny actually going back to that Superman
Hmm.
thing. One thing I've realized about Superman, he can't save everybody.
No,
Doesn't He doesn't save everybody because he's not able to.
no,
He's one person. I mean, he's got all these powers, but he can't save 7 billion people at the same time.
no, we can't.
He can only, if he can't. He can only do what he can do.
Hmm.
Um, he can help the people that he knows maybe, or people that are within his vicinity, kind of thing, that he's able
Yeah.
to help. Like,
Yeah.
but he's not able to help everybody, and that actually is also quite of a, in terms of my love of that character, is a good important lesson. Like, and like it's not my job to save people, and I don't have to help literally every single person because I don't have the bandwidth for that. I don't have
Yeah. Yeah.
the emotional or physical or mental bandwidth to help literally every single person
That
because
was my
yeah,
my revelation I got a couple weeks ago. I was like, I don't have to save the world. I don't have to fix the world, but I can fix my world. So it's a matter of figuring out what my world is because
yeah,
that's all I
absolutely,
can do.
yeah,
Well, James, you are a beautiful person. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we close this out?
thank you for having me on. And it's been great to share this with somebody and haven't really talked about this too much. Certainly the latter part of the journey I haven't talked about as much. Um, and also I didn't mention this at all, which is weird because it's quite a big part of my journey. But I have a podcast
Yes, you
of my
do.
own, and uh, Yeah, and so it's called the Poema Podcast, and it's nearly 300 episodes old now. I started it in 2016. Yeah, like it was kind of like it was kind of the way my creativity expressed itself after writing kind of fell away from me. And I discovered that I actually really enjoy it, and I'm quite good at it, and hosting guests and hearing other stories and sharing my own as well. Yeah, and I had some great guests on over the years, and yeah, if people want to, it's still going. So if people want to listen to that, it's on every podcast platform. And
I will
love
link that. I'll link that with an all link so people can choose whatever.
Yeah, there's plenty of
they
things
want.
to choose from. So, yeah, I'd love people to follow that. And I'm on Twitter and at James Prescott 77, and Instagram is the same. They're the places that I interact the most. So I don't really go on Facebook that much. I think I have a page there. James Prescott, writer and podcaster, I think is the page. But yeah, so I'd love to interact with people and get to know people. I love meeting new people. So yeah, do get in touch, you know.
Well, thank you, James, for your time, and thank you for your story. I'm looking forward to hearing this again when I edit it.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to The Wax Museum. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to keep you updated on everything Wax Museum. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or like us on Facebook. It's at Wax Museum Pod.
Air Smudge.